On the show today, we'll explore how Africa and Brazil can be better trade partners. As always, you can join the conversation with the hashtag #BeyondMarkets. You can follow my Twitter handle too at Esther Ubodaga. Now, the recent launch of the first Brazil Africa Institute office in Accra, Ghana, aims to deepen ties between Africa and South America's second largest economy, Brazil. The Brazil Africa Institute acts as a facilitator for economic development for governments and private sector between Africa and Brazil. So we ask, what are the catalyzing interests between Africa and Brazil? João Bosco Monte, President, Brazil Africa Institute, joined CNBC Africa's Kenneth Igbomor for this discussion.
Thank you for joining us today, Professor João Bosco. Quickly, I just want to get a sense of how the uniqueness of Brazil's relationship with Africa is different from that of China and that the US.
Well, Brazil is not that close to Africa, but it's not that far. We just have the Atlantic that united us. People used to say that the Atlantic divides us, but I think that is the opportunity to link. China, US, Europe, they are looking very straight to Africa as Brazil. Of course, if you compare the size of China with Brazil, it's not comparable at all, because China is China. China is everywhere and they are very aggressive. And I'm not here to give you figures, but China it's everywhere in Africa. US is always looking to Africa with some opportunities, I know that, and some European countries as well. But Brazil, because of the relationship, the ties, the history, the cultural aspect of this connection, could be more close to the African continent. We have 5 Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa, which could be a link. If you go to Angola, if you go to Mozambique, just Luanda and Maputo itself, 2 big cities, if you combine both of them, in terms of a market, have maybe 7-8 million people that could be important for Brazil to do trade, to do business. I think Brazil should know more about Africa, but also I keep saying to Africa, you should let us know more about you. If this connection starts between Brazil and Africa, I know that very soon Brazil will be more and more in some Africa places.
I'm going to backtrack to you on the history you talked about earlier. You know, how we seen that history between Africa and Brazil, how is that evolving?
If you go to some Brazilian cities, you feel like you are in Africa. I give an example. If you go to Salvador of Bahia, almost 70% of the population are black. So you feel like you are even here in Nigeria, right? So this is very important to link people, to unite people. I know that the root and the diaspora that we have in Brazil from some countries, from Africa countries, is important to link, and this could be beneficial for business. And some people do not consider that. Myself, I do consider that if we use these feelings, the hard feelings, this could be beneficial for the trade, for the business, and to operate both in Brazil and Africa. On the other way, we have some people from Africa that could come to Brazil to do business, to start to do things that Brazil cannot do.
Okay, so when you look at the work of your institute, I'd like you to talk to us through some of the programs of the Brazil Africa Institute and what you plan to achieve with that going forward.
When we start the operation of the Brazil Africa Institute back 6 years ago, we had in mind that Brazil Africa Institute as NGO could link interest of Brazil and Africa. What interest we are talking about? Could be business, could be research, could be training, could be survey, could be missions here and there in Brazil and Africa, but also this could be a trigger to involve not just Brazil and Africa, but other regions. And now, more and more, we have what we call triangular cooperation. So we link Brazil and Africa, but having the participation of Asians, Europeans, people in companies from United States, and also from other multilateral organizations like United Nations, banks like the African Development Bank. So the Brazilian Brazilian size of this operation and the African size is linked with the operation that we do at the Brasil Africa Institute. And also we need to see what's the potential, and the word potential is so, people are spreading this, but potential is important, but we need to see exactly what is feasible. So we are straight, we should work straight in the possibility of transform ideas into action. That's what we are looking for. So when we start 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I did not know the dimension and the size of this operation. And now we are doing many things in Brazil and in Africa as well. We have some events that I can talk more about this. And the events that we do are the facilitator and the catalyzer of this approach between Brazil and Africa. We are just one part of this equation. We try to put some piece together to see the whole picture of this puzzle. And Brasil Africa Institute is one of this link to connect both sides of the Atlantic.
So your first office is going to open in Ghana very soon. I just want to get a sense, why Ghana? And why now in Ghana? Why are you choosing to open your first office at this point in time?
When we start the operation of the Institute in Brazil, we understood very from the beginning that we should start also something in Africa. When and where was two questions that I was asking myself, even my team. When we should start when we are ready. So now is the time, after 5 years of operation, we realized that we should do things in Africa as we do in Brazil. Do events, for example, in Africa as we have in Brazil. But why Ghana instead of other places? That is not, I'm not here to compare places, countries, cities. We start to think about 5 or 6 places, locations that we should start. And Ghana was beneficial in this decision because of the airline connection that we have. We have some flights linking Brazil with Ghana, not straight flight, but we can go to Europe very easy and connect to Accra. And Accra is one of the hubs of this operation within West Africa. Right. Also, the conversation that we had with the government of Ghana was very good and very beneficial for the institute. So they gave us possibility to do things that will help us to enlarge, to emphasize our activities within this part of Africa. But I can tell you now, and for you and your audience, that we will do other things, and we have other offices very soon. In Africa. I cannot mention right now where this will be, but I may have the other opportunity to speak with you soon to let you know.
I hope you come to Lagos then.
Well, Lagos could be an opportunity, and I am not missing. The possibility to have the office here in Nigeria, and Lagos, of course, because of the connection. I've been coming to Lagos so often, and I know that Lagos is one door that we should open for our activities as well.
I want to now go into the focus of some of your programs. Can you talk me through some of the key areas where your programs are trying to address?
We have one activity that we are very focused every year, which is the Brasil Africa Forum. We are now coming to the 6th edition of the forum, and this year, as every year we do, we pick one specific subject to discuss. This year will be youth empowerment. Because youth empowerment is in the global agenda. Everybody's talking about that. But the idea for us is to bring to this event, the 6th Brasil Africa Forum. This will be November 22nd and 23rd of November this year. And the idea is to bring leaders from many areas, from many spheres, CEOs of big companies, ministers, presidents, people from the academia, professors, civil society as well, to present their ideas, good experiences, good practices. And after 2 days of discussion, I'm very sure that some opportunities can come out. As we see some previous events that we had like this. Last year we had The 5th edition was innovation technology. Before we had agriculture. So every year when we do this event, I know that some opportunities could be a reality. So this is one thing, one activity that we do every year. The other activity that I'd like to emphasize during this conversation with you is the YTTP, the Youth Technical Training Program, which is linked with this team. We bring young people from Africa to receive training in Brazil in areas that Brazil is succeeding very well. So agriculture is one of the areas, ICT, health, education. So those areas are important for Africa, and if we do not take care about young people, I'm very sure that we cannot have good results at the end of the day, right? Because if you just think to the dimension, the size, the scale of the population in Africa and Brazil, but looking straight to Africa, I mean, the size of the population of young people, it's increasing. So if you do not train them properly, they will not be professionals, equipped and skilled, right? So we need to give them the opportunity to be trained, but also to transform the place where they live. I'm not just thinking about giving them abilities and knowledge, but I'm thinking about change the ecosystem where they are involved. So if we bring people from agriculture sector to receive training in Brazil, I'm not saying that Brazil will solve the problem, but in some areas, if you look back to Brazil 40 years ago, 30 years ago, it's just like this. Just like here in Africa, just like here in Nigeria, just like other places within the continent. If they come to Brazil to receive training, and if they come back with this ecosystem, again, involved, they can transform local areas and bring in social and economic development.
We now continue our conversation with Joao Bosco Monte, President, Brasil Africa Institute, and we're discussing the catalyzing interest between Africa and Brazil.
I read an article where you made a comment about reinventing Africa. I'd like you to just share on that topic.
Well, reinvent ourselves, I think, is something that have to do every morning. When we wake up, we need to see how can I do differently. So when I mentioned that Brazil and Africa and what Africa should do to reinvent what they are doing is something very specific, but not difficult to achieve. We need to see what we're doing and what mistakes we did so far and what we have to do to avoid the mistakes and do things properly, right? Brazil and Africa, they are close, as I said at the beginning of this conversation, but we should understand what we can bring together out of this conversation, out of this discussion. So when I mentioned this in this article that you mentioned, that we need to reinvent ourselves, we need to think differently. We cannot do the same thing all the time, because if we do not see potential, for example, I'll give an example. If you look to ICT, if we come to Africa, how many companies are doing projects for software, hardware? Not too much. How many in Brazil are doing this? Some. Why don't we combine people and companies from Brazil and Africa to see this market? It's something that it's related to reinvent ourselves, right? How can we bring Brazilian people to invest in Africa? Yes, we can bring technology, but besides technology, why don't bring in management? Okay. Because if you just bring the machine, the equipment, this won't fix the problem. We need to bring the equipment, but also need to bring people to work with the equipment.
But people will also argue and say, shouldn't you have some level of some certified level of local content, especially at the C-suite stage?
Yeah, we need to see that, but we need to start to talk. We need to understand what we can do together, right? And most of the time we do not talk. Sometimes I come with the solution to you, and I do not customize. If I do not see specifically what you need and what I can offer, and also how and what I can learn from you, because it's not the way that I just teach you. I'm here to listen and to learn from you. So this is a coordinate project. So it's two ways, right? So we need to work together.
So from where you sit as from the Brasil Africa Institute, what would you say are the top areas of common interest between Africa and when you look at Africa in this space, we're looking at 54 countries here with all their uniqueness. You know, what do you say is the top areas to explore common interest across the 54 countries of Africa?
Well, when you say 54 countries, it's not the same thing, right? So, and I keep saying this to Brazilians. When they look to Africa, they do in a very wrong way. They think that Africa are one single place, which is not correct. So if you look to Nigeria, as we are talking about Nigeria too much, we cannot compare to Namibia, we cannot compare to South Africa, we cannot compare to Mali, because any country, it has, I mean, the specification that we need to understand. So when you look to Brazil as a big country, it's like a continent. I mean, the size of Brazil, it's almost the size of Africa in terms of dimension, and the population of Brazil, almost 200 million people, is too big. Almost the population of Nigeria, right? So if we combine Nigeria and Brazil, Brazil could be very interested to do things in Nigeria itself. And what could be the possibility of doing business between Brazil and Nigeria? Agriculture, yes. How Brazil succeed in agriculture in areas that Brazil started to work 40 years ago, could be transferred to Nigeria? Yes. If you go to Kenya in East Africa, can you do also agriculture there? Yes. So agriculture, I think, is one trigger that we have to work to start this operation in a size that we want to achieve. Scale up the production of crops in Africa. I think Brazil can help. So
beyond technology, agriculture, which are the usual suspects here, you know, what other areas do you see deep collaboration between?
I think people used to say that agriculture is the most important activity. Yes, we can do agriculture, but your question is very precise. If you go to ICT, can we do ICT as well? Yes. I mean, if you go to the universities in Brazil, can we bring Brazilian professionals from ICT to collaborate with universities here?
Yeah, so but beyond these two, agriculture and technology, are there any other green shoots we're seeing that, you know, the areas where we think can spark and bring a good, foster a good relationship between Africa and...
Trade is something that we have to emphasize. I mean, trade means many things, right? Now we just have this conversation within the continent, the trade, the agreement that was signed by some countries, not all of them. Nigeria did not sign yet. South Africa is trying to escape of this as well. So Brazil can work in the trade area. And I'm talking about trade very often now with people in Brazil and Africa as well, because we can help the intra-trade. This conversation between countries in Africa is very important. I'm not African, so I cannot go deep in this subject.
But I want to get your sense. So sitting as an outsider and watching the rest of Africa make this, 44 countries in Africa making this level of commitment, and we're seeing Nigeria and South Africa sitting on the fence. You know, what signal does that send to you as an outsider watching this?
Well, I think you guys need to do your homework, right? Need to talk among yourselves to see what's the best for you and for your neighbors. So it's not easy for me as an outsider, as you say, to give my recipe, my direction. From outside, and as a professor of international relations, I keep saying that you need to see what's the best for you and what's the best for your neighbors. You cannot do just for yourself, because if you do not consider who is around you, you cannot go very far.
Okay, let me take it from this point then. So what's the level of opportunity you see in all the African countries coming together with that agreement?
Well, I think when you start to dialogue, this is not the first discussion about this. I mean, if you go back like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, this start to be a subject they put on the table, right? Now the African Union in Kigali, they start to do something, and I think very precise and straightforward. And the African Union say, hi guys, why don't we do a very fair agreement? I think it's about time to think about trade between Africa, inter-trade. I was talking with some organizations within Africa to start at the Institute a study on the size of the trade between Africa and Brazil. And the idea when I start to dialogue with them is we can bring some experiences that Brazil achieved in the trade within South America with the Mercosur, right, with the countries related to Mercosur, and this could be beneficial for the continent. But there are some things that should be fixed. Infrastructure, again, this is not, I'm not the first one who is saying that. How can you link two countries without roads, without ports, without connectivity, right? So this is important. But one thing important about this trade is the movement of people. So if you are here in Africa, you are neighbor, if you cannot go to other places without visa, and sometimes the visa is a very sophisticated issue, should not be, should be easy, right? Without taking out this barrier of movement of people, trade is not so easy.
I can understand the trade barriers there, but I still want to backtrack a little bit and go back to your discussion about the trade between Africa and Brazil. And I want to get a sense of what you think about the trade balance, the balance of trade between Africa and Brazil. You know, how is it skewed?
Yeah, Brazil it's not buying too much as we should. I mean, Brazil is selling more than Brazil is buying. And the commodities that Brazil buys from Africa, oil, phosphate, some other minerals, are not so good for the trade. We should buy more from Africa. But what should we buy? So that's the other point. Africa should transform its raw material in products with more value add. Okay. To add value, right? Yeah. To value addition, I mean. Sure. So if you do not change the situation, I give an example. If you go to Ghana, or if you go to Guinea-Bissau, we buy cashew nuts. There is no transformation in the industry of cashew nuts. We buy the cashew nuts in raw material and send it to Brazil to transform the cashew from those places. Okay. So we should change this. We have to think out of the box. Again, how we reinvent ourselves, just like this.
Okay, so I want to come from a different angle. I'm looking at the work you're trying to do with your institute. You're trying to be a catalyst for growth, for trade, for different areas. I want to know how you think the level, or what level of interaction you're having with the development finance institutions like the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and all these organizations who are also trying to, whose areas of focus are in line with what you're trying to achieve.
So again, we are just one part of this equation. I'm not comparing myself with those organizations that you mentioned, the FDB, the World Bank, and others. They have their own role in this discussion, as we have our role as well. So what is our role in this discussion is to link Brazil and Africa, right? As our name mentioned.
Yeah, I was asking specifically about how the level of interaction that your organization has with these institutions to help foster your objectives.
Every year when we organize the Brazil Africa Forum, those organizations, they are there with us. So this may answer your question. So if you go to 2016, the African Development Bank came with a very big delegation. The president of the bank addressed the open of the event. Last year we had IFAD. The president of IFAD was the keynote speaker of the forum. This year, I already spoke with some authorities from those organizations that you mentioned, and they are keen to participate in the event, but also in the other activities. The first edition of the YTTP was financed by the African Development Bank last year. So we had 28 young people from 14 countries in Africa. They came to receive training in the cassava value chain. If you go to Nigeria, for example, just come back to Nigeria again. Nigeria is the biggest producer of cassava in the world, but there is no addition, no value addition for the production. So in Brazil, it's succeeding. So the African Development Bank financed this project. So how can we work as a catalyzer in this dimension of Brazil and Africa? Yes, we do this. We have the events, we have the activities, we have the research, and those organizations, multilateral organizations that are involved with us, I'm very sure that they can do by themselves the approach between Brazil and Africa. But with us, it's more easy because we are in Brazil, we are Brazilians, and now we are in Africa, we are Africans. So this is a possibility. When we open the office in Ghana, and this will be the first office, as I mentioned before, the idea is to give to those these organizations the possibility to work with us. We want to work together. This is what we have to do.
That was Joao Bosco Monte, President of the Brasil Africa Institute.